I just want to acknowledge how grateful I am to this community. I'm incredibly moved by seeing all of the folks here, and this is the type of people power I think that is going to be necessary in order to challenge some of these immigration laws. And I want to start, I'm not going to share too much of my story. There is a press packet out there, and you guys will get to hear about my journey through this press packet. But if this was simply about me, I would not be taking this step, if it was simply about my own immigration story. But one of the things that I've realized over the past couple of years, as an activist and as a person, is that I've lived in this country long enough to know that I already am American. It took me a long time to be able to get to this determination because of the fact that, of course, I don't have the paperwork. However, internally, I've always felt American. I've always felt as if I told someone that I was Senegalese, that in fact that I would be lying to this person, because I haven't been back to Senegal ever since I was a child. This is the country that I've adopted. This is my family that you see around this community. And I have been sadly appalled at the way this country has been treating immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants. About 3 years ago or so, a couple of us who are activists in the community started to hear about people in our community of Syracuse who are being disappeared. People who were walking to the grocery store and were being caught up by Border Patrol, by ICE. Nothing that we could do within the system could stop their deportation. This was a heartbreaking realization to me, but it also pushed me in terms of realizing that this immigration conversation that we're having around this country is not going to move in the right direction unless some of us who are undocumented and who have a little bit of privilege take some risks. And so I'm simply doing this and sharing my status with this community to try to help the community reject the fear that is at the heart of this conversation about immigration. The fear that undocumented people live with every single day of being deported, and the fear of US citizens who have bought into so many of the stereotypes about illegals. And let's be honest, we've all heard the stereotypes about illegals and how they're dangerous and drug dealers and all of that. And in the past couple of years, my experience of undocumented people is that they are people who are part of our community, who work hard, who care about their families, who love this country, and many of them would jump at the opportunity of becoming a US citizen in a heartbeat. It's just that we have a system that has demonized many of these people. And I'm not sharing this status of mine as a provocation. This is not a militant act. This is simply an invitation to the community to have a conversation and a dialogue around the issue of immigration that is based on true facts about who undocumented people are, rather than the dangerous stereotypes that we've heard about illegals. So instead of sort of droning on and on, I'm going to share the mic with some of my friends who have a lot more experience than I do dealing with some of these issues. And the first person that I'm going to pass the mic to is my dear friend and activist, Jose Perez, who's also an immigration lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, and I really admire you for this bold step that you're taking today, against my advice, by the way. Just for the record. Ali wanted me to talk about the DREAM Act and the comprehensive immigration reform piece. As many of you know, we have heard from President Obama approximately a week and a half ago that he was going to be stopping all deportations against qualified youth, and that is dreamers, people who have been here for the last 5 years, that came here before they were 16 years old, and that they are younger than 30 years old. However, the problem with that announcement is that that's not a final fix. That now these specific individuals that may qualify under the announcement have to renew the status every 2 years. They have to renew the employment authorization card every 2 years, and they will be subject to the discretion of the ICE agents and the immigration agents that, as we know, and I do this for a living every day, really need to avoid in this immigration debate, given the fact that the DREAM Act actually almost passed a year ago. It only failed by 5 votes in the Senate, even though the House has passed the DREAM Act itself. I would like to be brief because I know that we had only 5 minutes. But for example, the numbers for the Dreamers are out there. 1 year ago, the Budget Office of Congress said that by giving a status to these Dreamers, the revenue of the United States would increase by $1.6 billion, and the deficit will decrease by $1.4 billion in 10 years. So this is the right thing to do because of financial issues. This is the right thing to do because of our economy. This is the right thing to do because we are all human beings. And this is the right thing to do because they are as Americans as we are. So we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need the DREAM Act. And by the way, I don't know if some of you have heard the news, the United States Supreme Court just today announced that it's illegal to ask US citizens for papers. So in Arizona. And unfortunately, SB 1070 has been upheld in at least one provision. The Supreme Court struck down 3 other provisions that criminalize the immigrants, but they upheld the provision that allows the police officers now to, just based on appearance, just by my accent, just because of my accent or because I look Latino, they will be able to ask me for my papers. So that's why, another reason why we need comprehensive immigration reform, and we need to make sure we tell our Congress people, we tell our senators that we need them to act, and we need them to pass comprehensive immigration reform and the DREAM Act. Thank you.
So thank you, Jose, for your knowledge and passion as always. Next, I'm going to pass it off to my friend Ute, who has been working with farm workers for many years and who'd like to share some of her experiences.
Thank you, Ali. My name is Ute Ritz-Deutsch. I've been active in Amnesty International on various levels of the organization. I'm also active with the Tompkins County Immigrant Rights Coalition in Ithaca, and I've had the great pleasure to work with immigrants. I am an immigrant myself. I've been in this country for almost 30 years. And even though I had a green card, I had, in the beginning, US citizen children, so their citizenship status was different from my own. And I can tell you, even though I was documented, I was constantly in fear of getting deported. This is a very, very stark fear for people who are in this country who are not yet US citizens. And about 20% of the immigrants who do get deported from this country actually do have legal status, actually do have green cards. Because, I'm going to use the word immigrant farm worker here because many of them are actually not migrants in the sense of moving around, but have been in this community, sometimes for decades, right? So, in New York State alone are an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 farm workers. Many of them are undocumented. Many of them live daily in fear of getting in their car to go to the grocery store, to go to the doctors, to go to the drugstore to fill a prescription, because every single time they get in a car, they run the risk of being pulled over and put into detention and deportation proceedings, right? So, and we don't see these people, right? Unless we know what we're looking for, these people are invisible to us, right? Even though they are our neighbors, right? And they are, in fact, all around us in our community. As a human rights activist, I'm always stressing that human rights are universal. Okay, and what that means is basic rights apply to all persons regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of religious affiliation, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of country of origin, and regardless of immigration status. Right? Those rights include rights to safety and security, equal protection before the law and due process, right to non-discrimination, just working conditions, education, housing, and family unity. Right? And there are millions of US citizen children who every day live in fear of one or both of their parents being deported. Now, internationally, these rights are protected by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the United States signed on to in 1948, and the two subsequent treaties, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which the US also signed, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Now, the two migrant-related treaties are the Covenant on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and their families, and the Covenant relating to the status of refugees. Now, any of these treaties that the US signed, the US is actually bound by, right? These are binding, international treaties are binding and supersede domestic law. So is the United States protecting the rights of immigrant workers? In short, no. Immigrant farm workers are intimidated and discriminated against in the workplace and society at large. They lack equal access to basic services, including healthcare, housing, education. Their civil rights and the right to due process are often violated. And really, again, coming back to the main point, to improve the situation, we need comprehensive immigration reform. Does New York State protect the rights of immigrant farm workers? The short answer is no. According to New York labor laws, farm workers, now this includes domestic workers and immigrant workers, right? So regardless of immigration status, right? Even if you have a US citizen born here, right? If you're a farm worker, there are certain legal protections you do not have, okay? So excluded from protections, farm workers are excluded from protections that apply to workers who work in other industries or who work in business, right? For example, farm workers do not have the right to overtime pay, day of rest, collective bargaining, disability insurance, minimum wage for child labor, right? Decent living conditions, or health or safety, so for example, taking a break in the extreme heat. Now, these exclusions go back to the 1930s when the Dixiecrats in the South insisted that both domestic workers and farm workers should be excluded from the labor protections that were enacted during the Great Deal. These exclusions are based on racist policies that are intended to keep people of color from gaining basic rights. Okay? These shameful labor laws have been on the books around this country for over 70 years, and it's time we end these shameful practices. So what can we do? As New Yorkers, we can support the Farm Workers Fair Labor Practices Act, which was introduced last year and is being considered in the New York State Senate and Assembly. And the bill numbers are respectively S 1862 and A 1652. So if you care about where your food comes from, and if you care about what conditions that food was produced under, then call your local representatives and find out whether or not they have co-sponsored these bills, and if not, urge them to co-sponsor them. So in the absence of comprehensive immigration reform, we can at least try to get incremental improvements for immigrants, and one of these is protecting labor rights. As Aly has reminded us, undocumented immigrants are not criminals or thugs.
Thank you for these words. And in fact, since today is really about sharing the stories of people that we don't get to see in the media very often, and I just wanted to share very briefly the story of one person who led me to this act, which was a man who was an undocumented farm worker whom I met at an immigration reform conference a little over a year ago. He had participated in a hunger strike in order to advocate for comprehensive immigration reform. And his body was so exhausted by the end of the hunger strike that he had to be put in the hospital, and in order to be able to have some fluids put back in his body. And as soon as he was replenished, he went right back to the hunger strike in order to continue fighting for comprehensive immigration reform. And this is part of a campaign to simply be able to have an audience with Janet Napolitano of Homeland Security. They were not able to have that audience of Janet Napolitano. This is the kind of courage that I've witnessed from undocumented workers and activists. This is why I feel like what I'm doing today is very minor compared to the work that I've seen other undocumented activists do. Just to close it out, I thought I was very privileged to hear that my friend Kevin Agee from Hobbs Memorial Church was going to be available. He is one of Syracuse's, best role models in terms of social justice related issues, and a wonderful member of the faith community. And I'm just so blessed for him to be here so that we can close out the speaking portion. And then after that, if you have any questions, we can do a little bit of back and forth. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you very much, Aly. Certainly it's a great privilege to be a part of this gathering on this afternoon. I guess my friend Jose and I have something in common. One of the things that lawyers and preachers have in common is that 5 minutes can be somewhat of a constraint. Most of the time, both preachers and lawyers are just getting warmed up in 5 minutes. However, I'll do my level best, God being my helper, to be faithful to the parameters that you established for us beforehand. Aly asked me to share a few words, from a religious perspective, which is pretty easy for me to do. I will say so with this disclaimer, however, although I have been an ecumenical and interfaith advocate for many years, my expertise is Christian theology, so I will speak primarily from a Christian perspective as relates to a religion. However, as we gather together on this afternoon, although I'm not an expert in world religions, one thing I do know from my ecumenical and interfaith involvement is that every faith tradition that I know anything about has somewhat of a tenet of love of neighbor. And by definition, we need to be reminded that every human being on the face of God's earth is our neighbor. Therefore, we need to come with a principle of loving all of our neighbors unequivocally and unconditionally. So that needs to be said from the beginning. As a faith leader, it really disturbs me that many of our lawmakers who make laws, such as the one in Arizona, which the Supreme Court today upheld one portion of, like that terribly inhumane law in Alabama and other laws around the country. It really disturbs me that many of the lawmakers who push to have such laws on the books do so on the basis of religion. And as I look at the book of Leviticus, the 19th chapter, which is one of several places in the sacred scripture where it says you shall love your neighbor as yourself, the latter part of Leviticus chapter 19 verse 18 says, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But I would suggest that those who make these inhumane, unjust laws that lack compassion, perhaps they manage to overlook Leviticus chapter 19 verses 33 and 34 when they were studying the sacred scripture. So since they overlooked that, let me share that with you who are gathered here this afternoon. In the New Revised Standard Version, the passage reads, when an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Now, I think that language is pretty clear, isn't that right? at least all three of the Abrahamic faith traditions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Hello, somebody. I believe that language is quite clear as relates to how we should relate to our neighbor. And I did say my primary expertise is in Christian theology. Well, in the 25th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, Jesus uses a paradigm and the goats on his left hand. In the midst of that paradigm, Jesus said, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. This is the mindset we ought to all have as it relates to dealing with our brothers and our sisters. And as a Christian pastor and as a theologian, as an activist for social justice, I believe in a practical theology. I believe in a practical theology. Faith is not just something that's theoretically abstract. It's loving all of our neighbors unconditionally. The Bible says God is love. How can we love God whom we have not seen, yet not love our brother and our sister whom we see every day? And we need to be reminded that every human being is our brother and our sister. Nationality, whether you're a person of color or you're a person of the European heritage, it does not matter. If you are a human being, you are a creature of infinite worth, created in the image of the Most High God. And listening to some of the things that my partners here this afternoon have shared in terms of alluding to how individuals use fear and ignorance to perpetuate myths, to exacerbate, fears that people already have, and talking about how different forms of injustice are designed to keep people of color, for example, from being able to have opportunities. There are many who would ask the question, and I know there are a very small percentage of African Americans present here this afternoon, but many would ask the question, well, why would you, an African American male, participate in this setting? Why would you do something like that? Don't you know, those folk are taking jobs away from us? That's just another one of those myths that's perpetuated, and that's just a way that another way that folk who hoard power, try to bamboozle and manipulate people falsely. They exacerbate and perpetuate myths. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think we all realize that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So I'm glad this afternoon to have an opportunity to share in this time.
And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm afraid. I don't want to be deported. I don't want to have to leave this country. But if it happens, I will always feel like an American in exile somewhere else. I'm already formed as an American. I just don't have the paperwork, and I'm looking to adjust my status. And at the same time, I have just been touched by the lives of so many other people who are undocumented and who don't get the chance and the privilege to have a press conference, to talk about this issue. Because if they come out, then they might risk having to leave their kids or their husbands or their wives. So I have the chance to be able to do this because of my privilege, no matter how hard my personal circumstances have been. So I'm grateful, because I'm grateful that I have this opportunity, and I'm grateful that I get the chance to create a local conversation. This whole issue about immigration, it's all about fear. And what I'm trying to do here is to get people to calm down, to calm the hell down, that undocumented people are not coming for your babies and for your jobs and all the crazy stuff that you're hearing, in the right-wing media. We're just people who love this community, who love this country, who want to be able to remain here. So. I know that people have been coming out and doing this across the country for the past year and a half, and some people have been apprehended, been put in detention centers, had orders of deportation, but most of them at this point have not been physically deported. But at this point, there's no way to tell. So.
Do you have any idea about how the current candidates running for Congress feel, and whether there's any interest in making an outward commitment to you?
Boy, when I got the chance to work with the Alliance of Communities Transforming Syracuse, I did get to meet Anne-Marie Burkle, and we deferred on a lot of issues. The local congressional candidates, obviously, we're talking about Dan Maffei and also my good friend Ursula Razum, who is running with the Green Party. And I can't speak for the individual candidates. All I can say is that in terms of the parties, I don't think that immigration reform activists really have allies at this point in terms of the two major parties. I think that the Republican Party is demagoguing the issue, and the Democratic Party is terrified of speaking out for immigrants because the issue of immigration reform has been fused with the issue of terrorism, and anyone who speaks in favor of immigration reform is almost automatically branded as someone who is in league with terrorists. That's how poisoned the debate is. I'm glad to see that there have been some moves by the Obama administration and by the leadership of the Democratic Party, but it's been very, very slow coming. And many people have gotten themselves arrested and engaged in actions of civil disobedience in order to even get to this point. So I don't feel like I can give an endorsement to either party, although I would say that at the very least the Democratic Party does have comprehensive immigration reform bills and the DREAM Act. I mean, they have all of this stuff ready to be passed right now. The only problem is that any bill that includes any path to citizenship whatsoever is being demagogued as an amnesty bill. And as soon as you hear the term amnesty, conversation's over. Because when people hear the term amnesty, they think, oh, you just show up at the DMV, sign a paper, and all of a sudden, you're a citizen. Whereas all of the bills that are being proposed are very long, hard-earned path to citizenships. And they're there, and they could be signed into law now if the two parties could work on it. But right now, the Republicans have been moving the conversation further and further to the right, and there hasn't been very much pushback from the Democrats. And I do feel like even doing this today came out of a sense of real frustration that the political process right now is not very responsive to immigrants.
Jose, is there a possibility that Ali would have to report to authorities on a regular basis, and that would be his whatever status? Is that because I do know that many immigrants in certain situations do that, especially those who are parents of children.
Yes, well, that's called order of supervision pursuant to ICE rules, the Immigration Customs Enforcement rules. Once the person is detained and the person is subject to deportation hearings, and the person goes through those hearings, and the immigration judge deports the individual, then you can certainly try to work something out with ICE or the Department of Homeland Security for some sort of supervision order where, many people, for example, have ankle bracelets, other people have to report in Buffalo every month, other people has to make telephone calls at 6:30 a.m. If you are 1 minute past, then they come and get you. There are certain rules in place within the Department of Homeland Security and the Immigration Customs Enforcement that will provide to certain individuals the order of supervision. However, 85% of the cases, the Department of Homeland Security just deny those requests and they just deport the individuals. So certainly in Aly's case, not having children, for example, and not having a United States citizen wife will be difficult and the likelihood of passing something like or granting an order of supervision will be really small, the possibilities of getting that. Yeah.
I know there's a lot of us standing here with so much energy and so much goodwill. What I'm asking for all of us is, what would you recommend? What can we do to help you and to help this cause and movement? And that's where I'm posing to you as a very open-ended question. And I love you, brother, so thank you.
there are lots of things that can follow from this. First of all, I'd like to invite anyone who is connected to any kind of community, whether it's a faith community, an educational community. If you would like to have me come to speak on this issue and to start some local dialogues in the community, please let me know. I would very much like to create a community-wide conversation around this issue of immigration. But there are lots of other things that can be done, including really trying to hold our politicians accountable. And I mean, the two major things right now are needing to pass the DREAM Act and needing to pass comprehensive immigration reform that are going to allow families to remain intact and are going to allow people to work where they need to work. But I will also be working with a couple of other groups, including the Workers' Rights Center, and we're trying to come up with an immigration group, and we'll come out with different actions probably in the next couple of months or so. And once it's a little bit more clear, we shall let you know. Well, yeah, I mean, the thing about this conversation that's so hard is that the immigration issue is an emotional issue. And my gripe with the Democratic Party is that it has once again allowed the Republican Party to frame the issue as an issue of terrorism, as an issue of national security. And that's why we haven't been able to move in the right direction. In fact, I remember at some point, Senator Schumer, who is actually supposedly, one of our champions on immigration, wrote an op-ed, I think it was in Washington Post. It was either in Washington Post or the New York Times. But he co-wrote this op-ed, and in the language of this op-ed, he used the phrase, we need to pass comprehensive immigration reform in order to protect this country from the specter of 12 million more illegals coming into this country. Now, this is a Democrat who is supposed to be a leader on this issue, framing the issue as if it was about dangerous people coming into the country. But then you turn around and you say, well, we should give these potential terrorists, a path to citizenship. Of course that doesn't fly, And this is one of the reasons why there is this movement of undocumented activists coming out, simply sharing our stories and saying, hold on, I don't know who you're talking about in terms of these terrorists, but that's not me. That's not what I see when I look in the mirror. So at first there's going to be the grassroots education and the changing of the language that's going to need to happen in terms of, moving away from using demonizing terms like illegal aliens to undocumented workers, for example, or undocumented people. Because, as Reverend Agee said, I don't believe there is such a thing as an illegal human being. And the reason this issue is more than political is that it eats at the soul of lots of young undocumented people. A couple of months ago, there was a young man named Joaquin Luna who was undocumented who committed suicide. And one of the things that he put in his note was that he felt that he didn't have any future in this country, that he felt that he didn't belong anywhere. This is more than just about politics, and it's been very frustrating to see the contrast between how this issue is played out at the grassroots and the way it's talked about in the national media. So we need to reframe that conversation. And as U.S. citizens, as U.S. citizen allies, you have a tremendous amount of power in terms of pressuring your representatives, to move this conversation in the right direction. And I really hope that you do so.
To tag along with what Aly was saying, for example, how political this gets is that we have now Romney, for example, saying that last week before NALEO, which is the elected officials, the Hispanic Association for Elected Officials, saying that Obama's announcement was short and that he will take it to make it a permanent fix, when a month ago he said that he would deport all dreamers. So, this is how political this issue can become when we are talking about